Hello everyone, welcome to History and Culture. On September 17, 1953, in a shabby house in Beijing, 44-year-old Fu Yufeng lay in bed, her body emaciated, her face pale. She tightly gripped her husband's hand, his rough hands, once used for hard work to support their family, slowly bidding farewell. Her husband was an ordinary cleaner, and their life had been poor. He had never known the secret she had kept hidden for many years. At the end of her life, Fu Yufeng finally spoke, revealing the truth that had been buried in her heart for so long. Her voice was weak but firm. I was actually a concubine of the Qing Emperor. This statement, like a bombshell, shattered the ordinary world between her and her husband, unveiling a little-known chapter of history. Her words stunned her husband, as if everything she said was beyond his comprehension. However, Fu Yufeng's secret was not baseless. It was the beginning of an astonishing historical story. According to historical records, Fu Yufeng's real name was Erdit Wenxiu, of Mongolian descent, the daughter of Erdit Duangong. Wenxiu's grandfather, Erdit Shizhen, had been the Minister of Rites and had worked hard throughout his life to accumulate substantial wealth, leaving a considerable fortune and status to his son, Duangong. However, Duangong was not an industrious man. It would not be an exaggeration to describe him as a rotten tree that cannot be propped up. He squandered his family's wealth and did little else of merit in his life. He wasted everything, and their family fell into dire straits. Fortunately, Duangong had a wise and capable wife, Wenxiu's mother, Jiang Shi. Jiang Shi was a Han Chinese, intelligent and diligent. Duangong, having lived a life of excess, died young, leaving behind 3 young daughters and a pile of debts. Jiang Shi took on the heavy responsibility of the household, struggling to repay the debts while raising her daughters. She was determined to educate them, and all 3 daughters were very talented. In 1922, the last emperor, Puyi, needed to choose a concubine from a group of beautiful women. Wenxiu, with her family background and age, naturally became one of the candidates. Although Wenxiu did not want to become a concubine, she understood that she had little choice. She knew that if she entered the palace, it could improve the lives of her mother and sisters, and perhaps even bring hope to her family. So, she accepted the arrangement calmly. Although Wenxiu was not particularly beautiful, her intelligence and prestigious family background allowed her to stand out among the many candidates. At the same time, another candidate, Wanrong, who had received Western education, was also selected. Wanrong was lively and cheerful, deeply favored by Puyi. In contrast, Wenxiu was more reserved, dignified, and traditional, which made her less noticeable among the others. Despite this, Puyi appointed Wanrong as empress and Wenxiu as a concubine. At the time, both girls were only 12 years old and knew almost nothing about men and women. Wanrong, influenced by Western culture, was more daring and not entirely unfamiliar with marriage. Wenxiu, on the other hand, had grown up with feudal ideas and was a completely naive traditional girl. Puyi, upon seeing this, hesitated. On their wedding night, he didn't even enter Wenxiu's room but left her alone. Puyi was kind to both girls, but his attitude toward Wenxiu was more like that of an older brother. He knew that Wenxiu liked reading, so he often sent her books, invited teachers to tutor her, and even hired a foreign language teacher to teach her Western knowledge. In contrast, Puyi showed a clear preference for Wanrong, often staying overnight at her palace and sending her the latest novelties first. Initially, the 2 young women, Wenxiu and Wanrong, who were of similar age, had a very good relationship. Especially Wanrong, who was cheerful, carefree, and had received a Western education since childhood, growing up in a wealthy family. She always liked to share with Wenxiu the things she had learned from foreigners, partly to show off, partly because she was curious about the Western world. She often said that if they had the chance in the future, the 2 of them should go and see the outside world together. Wen Xiu always listened with a smile, quietly accompanying Wan Rong. Their personalities were complementary, one active, the other calm, and they got along harmoniously. Their relationship seemed very peaceful, as if nothing could break this tranquility. However, as they grew older, subtle changes began to occur in their relationship. Wan Rong gradually became aware of the differences in their social statuses. Although she was the empress, the education she had received was heavily influenced by Western thought, which emphasized the concept of monogamy. In her eyes, her husband, Puyi, should not have other women around him. Even though Wen Xiu had no intention of vying for his affection. And Puyi repeatedly said he only regarded Wen Xiu as a sister. Once jealousy took root, it was hard to control. Wan Rong began to feel dissatisfied as she saw Wen Xiu remain calm and poised, with a temperament different from hers. She started to think that Wen Xiu was deliberately acting lofty. Especially when Puyi would reward Wen Xiu, which made Wan Rong feel angry and resentful. Thus, Wan Rong stopped laughing and playing with Wen Xiu like she used to when they were younger. Instead, she began to mock and sarcastically tease her from time to time, writing letters to her like a spoiled child. The content of the letters was nothing new, mostly reminding Wen Xiu to remember her place and not act too aloof. However, Wen Xiu was not angry, she found these remarks amusing. She chose not to retaliate but responded in a more refined way. She would take cinnabar and circle the misspelled words in Wan Rong's letters, then carefully correct them next to them. Compared to the illiterate Wan Rong, Wen Xiu's handwriting was elegant and neat, looking particularly graceful. This non-threatening, yet highly insulting, response infuriated Wan Rong to the point where she would often throw her pen and smash her inkstone in the palace out of frustration. Although Wan Rong was very jealous, she still disdained to use malicious means to deal with Wen Xiu. On the other hand, Wen Xiu was completely indifferent to Wan Rong's provocations and even found her actions added some fun to her otherwise dull palace life. Every time Wan Rong made a provocative move, Wen Xiu cleverly countered it with ease. Like using 4 ounces to move 1,000 pounds, causing Wan Rong to jump into the fire pit herself, enraging her to the point of breaking things every day. As a result, the subtle undercurrent between the two, though there were occasional small frictions, never escalated into a major conflict. Puyi was indifferent to their quarrels and chose to turn a blind eye, letting them amuse themselves. Originally, it seemed that life could continue like this, peaceful and quiet, with no one questioning too much. However, the turbulent times would not allow anyone to remain in a state of perpetual stability. Even the nobility in the royal palace could not escape the changing tides of history. In 1912, although the Qing dynasty had effectively ceased to exist, Puyi still maintained the semblance of an emperor within the Forbidden City. But by 1924, Feng Yuxiang launched the Beijing coup, leading troops to expel Puyi and his family from the Forbidden City, marking the complete collapse of the Qing dynasty. After leaving the palace, Puyi moved with his family to live in the Zhongyuan, in Tianjin. Though no longer an emperor, the former ruler of a nation, even reduced to a commoner, still possessed great wealth and lived a comfortable life. Wan Rong, who had never been particularly attached to the Forbidden City, felt like a bird set free upon arriving in Tianjin. She enjoyed life freely, shedding the cumbersome palace attire and donning kipayos, wearing high heels, and frequently accompanying Puyi to high society banquets, enjoying the admiration and envy of the outside world. Meanwhile, Wen Xiu, observing all of this, felt a deep sadness. She had once felt loyalty to the Qing government, and seeing its fall made her feel as though she had lost the foundation of her homeland. She had repeatedly advised Puyi and Wan Rong not to indulge in excessive luxury and extravagance, and to maintain some sense of restraint. However, Wan Rong believed that Wen Xiu was jealous of her and began to provoke her with sarcastic words. Puyi, although outwardly agreeing with Wenxiu, continued with his own ways, unchanged. Unlike Wanrong, who was purely enjoying life, Fuyi's frequent appearances in high society were not entirely for pleasure. He was seeking Japanese support, hoping to collaborate with Japan in an attempt to restore the Qing. Wenxiu had long seen through Fuyi's intentions. Though there was no romantic relationship between her and Puyi, and though she and Wanrong had quarreled for years, she had come to regard them both as family and still harbored deep feelings for them. Upon learning of Fuyi's plans, Wenxiu became anxious. She knew full well that cooperating with Japan was akin to inviting a wolf into the house, which would ultimately lead to even greater disaster. She disregarded the possible resentment from Puyi and went to him every day, trying to persuade him to abandon the collaboration with Japan. Initially, Puyi regarded Wenxiu as family and listened to her advice. But over time, he grew increasingly irritated and eventually decided to avoid her. Wanrong, egging him on, encouraged Puyi to move to the Japanese concession in Tianjin. He moved in with Wanrong, leaving Wenxiu alone, abandoned. Puyi's attitude towards Wenxiu turned cold. And even the servants who accompanied him no longer paid her any attention, seeing their master neglect her. The servants naturally did not show her any respect either. From then on, Wenxiu began a life of loneliness and suffering, enduring Puyi's indifference and the contempt of the servants every day. That gentle, graceful, and dignified woman was gradually worn down, both physically and mentally, by torment. During these years in Tianjin, Wenxiu still harbored feelings for Puyi and Wanrong. But she had suffered such unfair treatment that her heart had already been shattered. With the country in ruins, her family destroyed, and the misunderstanding of her relatives, the physical and emotional torment she endured made her feel incredibly oppressed. Wenxiu had often thought of giving up everything, of ending her life to put an end to all the pain. However, perhaps it was not her fate to die, or perhaps deep inside, she still longed for survival. For her several suicide attempts all ended in failure. One time, Wanrong went back to the Zhang garden to fetch something and accidentally discovered Wenxiu holding scissors, preparing to take her own life. Wanrong screamed, calling for the servants. She stared blankly at Wenxiu. The woman who had once been quiet and poised, always smiling in the face of her sarcastic remarks, was now weathered, haggard, and unrecognizable. Wanrong opened her mouth, unsure of what to say, and silently called for Puyi. When Puyi saw that Wenxiu had attempted suicide, he was filled with rage. He coldly ordered the servants to monitor Wenxiu closely, his eyes filled with disgust and indifference. Wenxiu looked at Puyi, her heart overwhelmed with unprecedented despair. From that moment on, Wenxiu, who already had nothing, lost her only remaining freedom. Not only had she lost her country, her family, and her dignity, but even her most basic right to freedom was stripped away, plunging her into even deeper isolation and helplessness. In July 1931, Wenxiu aimlessly wandered the streets, when she suddenly saw Puyi and Wanrong, both dressed elegantly, entering the Japanese residence. Upon witnessing this, a ripple of emotion stirred in Wenxiu's heart. She thought of how Puyi and Wanrong had maintained relations with the Japanese, and her heart was filled with pain. Wenxiu lowered her head, silently deciding that she would give Puyi, Wanrong, and herself one last chance. That night, she found Puyi and calmly said to him, "Now that the title of Emperor of the Xiantong has been abolished, the titles of Emperor and Empress no longer exist. I hope you can give Wanrong and me equal power. Also." Before she could finish her sentence, Puyi angrily kicked her, pushing her harshly to the ground. The force of the kick was so great that even Wanrong, who was standing nearby, was stunned and remained silent for a long time. Furious, Puyi picked up a whip and lashed it at Wenxiu, strike after strike. Each lash seemed to pierce her soul. Soon, Blood stains began to soak through her light-colored skirt. Puyi did not stop, as if not satisfied with just that. And the force of the whipping became more intense. Each lash not only tortured Wenxiu's body but also deeply wounded her already broken heart. The pain was almost unbearable, and her body curled up on the floor. However, she did not utter a single complaint or plea for mercy. Puyi's anger was not just because Wenxiu had disrespected him, but also because, as the emperor of the Qing dynasty, he had to rely on Japan and was ridiculed by them as a mere plaything. This humiliation made him furious. And he was filled with resentment. After his rage subsided, Puyi felt a bit of regret. But his pride as an emperor prevented him from lowering his head to Wenxiu. In the end, he coldly ordered that the barely conscious Wenxiu be carried away, dragging the still stunned Wanrong with him. By the time August came, Wenxiu's injuries had mostly healed. The whipping had made her see Puyi's true nature. She realized that Puyi could never escape the fantasy of his imperial dreams. The lashings had completely destroyed the last shred of emotion between them. Soon after, Puyi received 3 letters delivered by eunuchs. When he opened the envelopes, he saw that they were from Wenxiu. And his heart couldn't help but feel a bit of joy. Thinking that she might want to reconcile, apologize, and make peace. However, when he opened the letters, he found that one of them was a handwritten letter from Wenxiu. And the other 2 were divorce papers. Puyi's face instantly turned pale with rage. Wenxiu's handwriting was neat and elegant. In the letter, she first thanked Puyi for allowing her to continue her studies, and expressed that she would forever remember this kindness. Then, she changed the tone of her words, stating that she had been married to Puyi for 9 years, but had never once received his affection. She did not long for his love, but merely hoped to receive his attention and care like a sister. But he had never cherished her feelings. Now, she had completely let go, with no more attachments, and only wished for a divorce. Puyi could not believe that Wenxiu, who had always been obedient and gentle, would so decisively sever ties with him. In the history of the Qing dynasty, no woman had ever requested a divorce from the emperor. Such humiliation made Puyi incredibly angry. And he wished he could immediately summon Wenxiu and force her to explain herself. However, Wenxiu had already handed over all the divorce paperwork to her lawyer, and quietly left. Puyi could only watch helplessly as the lawyer arrived to negotiate, his heart heavy as if carrying a mountain. At this point, he did not want to escalate the matter further. And with a splitting headache, he reluctantly signed the divorce agreement. In October 1931, Puyi, in his pursuit of his imperial dream, secretly infiltrated Manchuria under the temptation of the Japanese and became the Emperor of Manchukuo. However, how could the Japanese truly help him restore the nation? As Wenxiu had predicted long ago, the Japanese merely sought to use him as a puppet, with no genuine intention to support Puyi. Puyi's days in Manchukuo were a living nightmare. At the slightest command from the Japanese, he had to tremble in fear, walking on thin ice. Meanwhile, Puyi's wife, Wanrong, was lured by the Japanese into taking opium and soon became like a wilted, living corpse, her once beautiful face now haggard and lacking the glow it once had. During her drug use, she often grabbed her own hair in agony, crying uncontrollably, and even lost consciousness. Seeing his wife in such a condition, Puyi became angry and started to speak harshly to her, no longer showing the tenderness and affection he once had. Faced with her husband's indifference, Wanrong's eyes dimmed, and the vitality and beauty she once had vanished completely. Later, rumors spread that Wanrong, in her addiction, had an affair with a guard and soon became pregnant. Upon learning this, Puyi was enraged and ordered the baby to be abandoned. He then had Wanrong confined to the cold palace, where she was never seen again. In the cold palace, Wanrong lived out her remaining days in solitude and misery. Not long after, she passed away in great pain, ending her short and tragic life. However, after leaving Puyi, Wenxiu seemed to be reborn. She changed her name to Fu Yufang and began a new life. She returned alone to Beiping, but due to the war, her family had long been lost. She could only rent a small house in Beiping. Although she had some savings, she knew she could not rely on them forever. Having been educated and possessing beautiful handwriting, she found a job as a teacher at the Sishan Primary School in Beiping. However, not long after Wenxiu settled in, her true identity was revealed by malicious people. Former divorcee, Wenxiu, the former empress, becomes a teacher, became a hot news topic, breaking her peaceful life. Every day, large numbers of reporters and curious people would come to harass her, making it unbearable. Ultimately, she had to quit her teaching job and withdrew from society as much as possible to avoid further disturbances. As the war intensified, Wenxiu led a life of displacement, constantly on the run. To make a living, Fu Yufang did various jobs, selling snacks, newspapers, and embroidering, doing all kinds of hard and dirty work. The hardships of life did not break her, instead, they strengthened her resolve. In 1945, the Japanese army was finally driven out of China. When she saw the news in the newspaper, she couldn't help but shed tears. She silently thought to herself, "It's good, the Qing government is gone, but China is still here." That year, Fu Yufang joined a newspaper company as a proofreader. Her talent and dedication caught the attention of a man named Lu Zhendong, whose gentleness and sincerity deeply moved Fu Yufang. In 1947, they got married. Lu Zhendong had once been a major in the army of the Guangxi warlord Li Zongren, but later moved to Beijing and worked as a janitor. Although his salary was low, life was stable and peaceful. Fu Yufang and Lu Zhendong had a good relationship, but unfortunately, due to Fu Yufang's health issues, they remained childless for many years. On September 17, 1953, at the age of 44, Fu Yufang suddenly woke up in the middle of the night due to severe chest pain, gripping her husband's hand tightly. Lu Zhendong, seeing his wife in agony, was terrified and immediately tried to take her to the hospital, but Fu Yufang stopped him. It seemed as though she had already known her life was about to end. Tears of pain flowed from her eyes as she mustered the strength to say her final words to her husband. I am Wenxiu, I am Erdity Wenxiu, the last imperial concubine of the Qing Dynasty. Before she could finish speaking, she closed her eyes in agony and never opened them again. Historians have commented that from the very beginning, Wenxiu never took her time as an empress seriously. Compared to Wanrong, who spoke of modernization and Western equality, Wenxiu was more like an ordinary modern woman. She never thought of herself as superior or inferior to anyone else. She calmly accepted her fate as a consort in the palace. And she also calmly accepted the years of falling from the heights of royalty into the mundane world. She never fought for anything but was incredibly resilient. It was this peace and resilience that allowed her to live each remaining day of her life with such tranquility. This is the History and Culture channel. Liking and subscribing are the greatest help and support to us. Thank you everyone and see you in the next time.